All right, Erica Komisar is here, psychoanalyst. You are also a parent advocate. You've been doing years of research, basically, really to let us all know that we've been lied to as parents, especially us as women. You're a clinical social worker, an author, Being There, unbelievable book, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. Erica, I'm so glad to have you here and excited because I told you this before we started. Basically, everything that you advise women maybe not to do to raise healthy children, you're looking at your girl. I've done them all.
Thank you for having me.
So, okay, you really talk about, I found you because a clip of yours had gone viral and you were
Yeah.
talking about daycare and really how hurtful that is to children psychologically for their growth. And we've kind of all been misled in the idea of you've got to socialize your babies, get them in daycare. And if they're in daycare, they'll do better in pre-K and they'll do better, as they go along in school. And really, a lot of the parenting advice that we think that society has given us over the past 20 years is a lie. Is that
Yeah.
kind of accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate. Yep.
Okay, so let's start with what are some of the biggest lies that parents, specifically mothers, have been told about raising babies?
Suppose the first one would be that quality time is enough for children under the age of 3. That if you're just there when you're there, that it's enough. And it's not enough because what I say to mothers is you can be physically present and be emotionally checked out, but you can't be emotionally present if you're not physically present. And under the age of 3, children are neurologically, emotionally, and physically fragile. And, over the past 75 years, we've been trained to turn away from our children's fragility, to actually not see it, and when we do see it, to tell us that it's not fragility, they're fine, turn away. And that has been to the detriment of our children because their fragility is real. And that presence, that physical and emotional presence in the first 3 years is what makes the difference between having a child who is resilient to stress and can regulate their emotions in the future and one that cannot.
What does it mean to be emotionally present? Which sounds like a basic question, but as a mother, I was saying to you, I didn't put my son in daycare until 18 months. He had a little nanny, and she would take him like half the day, and then I would pick him up, or his dad would pick him up. So, and I didn't do that because I had read your book or taken your advice. It
Yeah,
just it just happened that the
right.
daycare that we liked didn't accept children until 18 months. So we were like, well, we'll figure this out. We'll get this
Right.
part-time nanny. He'll be home with us, right? But what does it mean to be emotionally present? Because lots of times when you have a little one, it's easy to like turn on the TV, it's easy to get on the phone. I mean, does it emotionally present mean like you're constantly engaging with them or you're just emotionally healthy? What does it mean?
No, it does mean engagement, but it's not constant engagement. We're never constantly engaged with the baby, and yet we're physically and emotionally present enough that when the baby needs us. So babies also play independently at moments. It's sort of a dance. You could think of it like a dance, that there are moments when you're engaged with the baby and sitting on the floor. And I encourage every parent to do floor time with babies every day, and where you're outside taking them to the playground and running around with them. And, engagement is an active thing. It's not a passive thing. And it means basically putting aside all of your distractions, and I think part of the issue today is that, parents have lost the ability to play. They've lost the ability to allow for moments of boredom without you know, without turning away. They struggle themselves with emotional regulation. We think of emotional regulation as the ability to tolerate things like sadness and fear and aggression. But emotional regulation is also frustration tolerance. It's the ability to tolerate moments of boredom and frustration without feeling like you need to run away. And so basically the last 75 years, we've raised very fragile children who've turned into very fragile adults who can't cope with much frustration. And you know, a lot of this gets blamed on technology, and there's a certain aspect of technology that's exacerbated it, but it's not what caused this problem. What caused this problem is that about 75 years ago, we dropped our children. We dropped them for more important things. We dropped them for work and career ambition and our personal endeavors, whatever they were, you know, personal interests, personal desires, pleasurable pursuits. But we dropped our children. And in doing so, we created a generational expression of children who turned into adults who cannot cope with very much frustration tolerance, much boredom. Raising babies is a joyful thing, but it also has downtime. It's slow. It has moments of, you know, sitting on the floor and watching your baby play. And in my book, Being There, I describe a Danish mother. I think she was Danish, who I interviewed because I wanted to see the cultural differences, who said, you know, the problem with you Americans is everything has to be stimulating you every minute, like a basketball game. You know, whereas being with the baby is like watching the grass grow. It's like looking out a window and seeing the beauty of nature. It's not fast, you know, it's not a snowstorm. And so I really do think that culturally we have a problem. And that problem is now trickled down to how we raise our children, and our babies are suffering for it.
Talk to us about that, the suffering. In your research, you have found now almost 1 in 5 children will develop some sort of mental health issue, ADHD, anxiety, depression. I mean, that's wild. And also at the same time, I think now that my son is almost 4, going to school, you see these kids now at a younger and younger age, the parents talking about them having anxiety. Almost all of them are diagnosed with something. My son is diagnosed with speech, delay. Now that's fine, but so how do those correlate? Because in your work, you really are kind of have found that us as parents, sort of putting them in daycare, believing we can have these big careers plus a kid, is really kind of leading to a lot of this. Is that correct?
Yeah. Have you met a parent today who's not stressed out beyond belief, who's not torn in bits between their responsibilities of parenting and the responsibilities to their high-powered careers? And so you answered your own question, I think, is that raising children is meant to be, for the most part, is meant to be something that is consuming. It is a very consuming, all-consuming thing, and it is it's a full-time job. And so, I mean, when we decided that women could do 2 full-time jobs at the same time, I mean, men don't do 2 full-time jobs. And so, to raise healthy children, you can't evacuate that role of raising your children or delegate it to others, not if you want them to be healthy. Now, you can get support. In history, women have never had children in isolation. They've never raised children in isolation. They've raised them in communities of women, actually. And whether they were grandmothers or aunts, or your next door neighbor who was your best friend, who your children would call auntie, we lived in small communities and tight communities, and we lived in extended family communities. And so there was always somebody who that child really knew and loved, and was a kinship bond that child felt safe with if a mother did have to work. But the way that we raise our children is very disconnected. Mothers are isolated. I mean, you'd say culturally, we've really gotten it wrong. Something happened in modern culture in the last 75 years, which changed the map for children, but also for parents. I mean, I wouldn't say parents are happier. Parents aren't happier. Parents are less happy because, this is how I'll say it. When our expectations of ourselves and our lives and our children exceed our capabilities, it leads to deep unhappiness. And so the expectation that we can do it all at the same time and do it all fabulously, have fabulous careers and fabulous children, and is exactly what I said, having two full-time jobs at the same time. It's not possible. Something has to give. And so, our expectations, again, exceed our capability. And that leads to depression. It either leads to our own depression. It's why there's such a high postpartum depression. It's funny, everybody uses the term postpartum depression. Postpartum depression was really reserved to the first 3 months, usually related to hormones exacerbating early trauma. But now people are using it well into 6 months, a year, 2 years. I have people coming to me at 2 years of age after they've had a baby and saying, I'm suffering from postpartum depression. I said, no, I'm sorry. You're suffering from depression. That's not postpartum depression. But what maybe happened is having a baby exceeded your expectation, increased that discrepancy between your expectations and your capability.
All right, talk to us about that. Where along the line, was it the feminist movement? Was it the feminist movement plus something else? But I'm a product of that. I believed that I could have this fabulous career first. My husband could raise the kids. And of course, what you talk about so eloquently in your books and interviews is like, then once you have the baby as a mother, I'm like, oh, all I want to do is be a mom, you don't think about that part till you really have the baby. And then you're like, oh my God, nobody, I don't want him at night with anyone else. I don't want him, he's just my best friend, and
that's if it stimulates a healthy instinctual response. So say that having a baby is meant to light up a part of your brain and is supposed to kind of light up an instinctual and evolutionary instinctual response that we've had as human beings, as mothers for thousands of years that helped our species to survive. We're mammals. And it's very rare to see mammals reject their young, but that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing mothers that would prefer to go to work than be home with their children. That is an anti-instinctual response, but that's what we're seeing. And multi-generational. So there's a lot of research, which I could bore you with the research, but to say that there's something called generational expression of things like trauma and loss and depression, but there's also generational expression of instinctual responses. If you have a response to your baby where it lights up your brain and you respond in kind by wanting to be with your baby above all else, that instinctual response is passed down to the next generation. But if you don't have that response because there's trauma or loss in your past, then that will not be passed down to the next generation. So 3 generations in, soon to be 4, we have mothers that are not feeling that instinctual pull towards their own babies. It's all over the internet. There are these websites where mothers get on and say, I can't stand it. I hate being pregnant. I hate breastfeeding. I can't wait to go back to work. This is awful. I can't stay up at night. Just like, it's almost like, it's as if they had a transplant and their body is rejecting something foreign, which is not supposed to be foreign.
And you say that's really passed down from generation, because we've been now convinced as women, like, you could put your career first. You should have your career. It's time for you to do everything a man has done. Is that right? Do you kind of feel like the feminist movement is sort of where this started?
So it started, well, if you really want to go back, you could say it started with the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we could really go back and say it started when women were expected to leave their babies. Women always worked, raising children as work, but women also worked outside the home. They were gatherers instead of hunters. They were farmers. They owned little shops where they sold fruit, or women always worked. They supported their family, but the children went with them. So in other words, they weren't separated from their children to work. If they had to work, their children were with them. It was part of it would be like leaving your arm at home.
Yeah.
You don't leave your arm at home, bring your arm with you.
Yeah.
So they would wear their babies to the fields or to the store, whatever. They would take their toddlers with them. It was just what you did, right? And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and it forced women to go to factories and leave their children at home. And then the wars happened, World War I and World War II, where women now were responsible for working in factories. So there was that. There was the beginning of a seed was planted. But I would say most middle class and upper middle class women didn't do that. Working class women were forced into factories. Middle class and upper and affluent women weren't forced into factories. So then now comes along the feminist movement and the Me movement. And they coincided. The Me movement was a movement that said, my needs come first. All that matters is me, my desires, my pleasures, my whims, my needs. And it rejected the idea of community and responsibility and commitment to a collective and said, only you matter. And even therapeutically, I'm going to say there was part of, not what I do, because as a psychoanalyst, we never indulged in, I mean, not the good ones anyway, indulged in the idea that your self-centeredness was at the core of, meaning you should always think of your own needs first. In truth, of course, you need to think about and feel your feelings and your needs, but you live in a collective. You don't live in isolation. So add that to the feminist movement, which also told women the only thing that mattered was them. All that matters is you, your power. Let's empower you. Let's get you out there. Let's get you to be, highly successful and achieved and compete with men. But what got forgotten in all of that is that those women were also mothers and sisters and aunts and grandmothers who supported the collective. And so what got forgotten was the children. And so combine all of those things and you have a formula for narcissism and self-centeredness. And unfortunately, that is passed down generationally. If you had a narcissistic mother who preferred to be at work than to be home with you and delegated your care to daycare or to nannies or whatever, then when you have a child, it's not that something can't get turned on in you, because it can, and I've seen it happen. It's really interesting. Call it like a dormant instinctual response. I can see it light up in women, even who have had abuse and trauma and loss, and mothers who are narcissistic. For the most part, narcissistic mothers produce narcissistic daughters and narcissistic sons. And so that narcissism, which is me, all that matters is me, everybody else is second. First of all, the root of all happiness is not in meeting your own needs. The root of happiness is in caring for others and helping others. And something that is the holy grail that people seem to be looking for today is that just focusing on yourself is not making people happy.
Oh my God, yeah. I can't tell you how many people I know. Yeah. I mean, especially women, stay-at-home moms or women that have a lot of money that come to mind, and they're the most unhappy human beings of all time. And they spend a lot of time on their appearance and losing weight or what they look like. And it's like so unfulfilling. Talk to us more about what can women do. Okay, you really can't have it all, right? Which I love that you're honest about that with women. Having these high-powered careers as a CEO, as a female, and then you want to have 3 kids. In my case, right? I want to have this like huge podcast and talk show, but I want to have 3 kids. It's like, that's probably going to be hard to do and raise those kids to be fun and happy and well-adjusted. Maybe, my husband and I can find the balance. But how can women, if they want to work, mostly I like to work because I really enjoy the money. I love being with my son. But then I'm like, oh, I really do like, I love the feeling of having plenty of money, right? So what's a career, or how can women strike a balance? Is there such thing as a balance?
So first I'll say that you can do it all in life, because life is long and you can have it all in life, but you just can't have it all at the same time if you want all of those things, if you want to do them well, right? And so there was a book, I can't remember when I was younger, called Everything I Ever Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten or something. It was a book that had a funny name like that. But what it said is, okay, what do you learn when you're little? You learn to wait. You learn to share. You learn to give. You know, there's certain things that you learn that you're supposed to learn at home, but you also learn them when you go to kindergarten. You know, or what they meant is by the time you get to kindergarten, you should know these things. And I think what we haven't taught our children is a lot of those things, because we're not around enough to teach them those things, and we don't model that for them. So we don't show them that, in fact, I can wait to have that big career till you're older, till you need me a little bit less, or you're also busy with your life. You're still going to need me. But remember, when children go to school, they go to school from 8 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon. That's 7 hours. Is that 7 hours?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's a good day. I mean, no one should work more than 7 hours, in my opinion. So if you think about it, if you can just wait, so if you can, I don't know, do the research on what you will do when your children go to school, and just bide your time and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and, you know, sort of think about building, but very slowly, a slow build. Maybe work part-time when you're raising younger children. And then as they get older and they get to be teenagers and they're out of the house until 5 because they have sports or whatever, now you have 7 or 8 hours a day when they're working and you can work. So part of it's waiting. I mean, I really feel like that's what we've lost, and that's what women have lost. They can't model waiting.
Yeah.
So I'm a very good example. I mean, as well as many of the women that I interview in the book, and I almost feel like there's a woman named Neha Rush who just wrote a book called Power Pause. But the issue I have with that book is it talks about just 0 to 3. And it says, okay, from 0 to 3, you can take a power pause from your CEO position and go back to your seat. Guess what? Being a CEO when you have children in the house is going to mean that you neglect your children. There's just no two ways about it. But if you wait till your children are in college and nobody wants to talk about the power of menopause. Maybe we should be talking about that to young women and say, actually, what happens is when you get to be in your 40s, you get this burst of energy because your estrogen drops, but your testosterone rises. It's the opposite for men. And so men get sleepy in their 50s and 60s and are slowing down, and women speed up. And they're looking for another thing to nurture. So when are you most productive? In your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s as a woman. So if we can teach women, have your babies, give it your all. If you want to work a little, develop your skills in those years that you're raising a child. Get a part-time degree online. So when your children are older, you're ready to go, start to talk to people about funding your business, but don't start your business. Learn to wait. And then when the timing is right and your children need you less, then there's no conflict for you. And as you head into menopause, you have this burst of energy where your husband's going to be sitting by the pool drinking Mai Tais. You're going to want to zoom off and be successful, It's why I really don't understand this whole paradigm of retirement, because I think what's happened is men controlled the narrative with their careers about retirement. When men were ready to retire at 60, they said, right, 50 or 60, they said, right, we're going to Florida. Whereas that was women's time to shine and have careers and develop themselves. And so, if we were going to defy some paradigm or some narrative, it should have been that narrative that we were defying, not the narrative of mothering. Mothering is one of the most meaningful things you will do in life, probably for many the most meaningful. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be the money you made or the career success you have or the followers you have for your podcast. When you die, when you're lying on your deathbed, it's not going to be those things that you reflect on and say, that was the best part of my life. It's going to be the people who are loving you, sitting by your bed as you die. Those are the people who you're going to say, I either had rich, deep, loving, intimate relationships with the people around me, or I didn't. And if you're going to have regrets, it's going to be regrets about that. So, yeah, we have lied to women and we've lied to men.
What do you say, Erica, to people listening to this that are probably like yelling, I don't have the luxury to stay home. I don't have the luck. Now things are more expensive than ever. Inflation is crazy. I mean, I live in Los Angeles trying to buy a house. You can't buy anything for less than $1.3 million. I mean, what do you say to women who are probably so irritated right now? How do you do it?
I say that not everybody has the same choices, but we all have choices. And a lot of the choices, if you are a really, should I say, if you're a woman, a single mom who works in a 20-hour, $20, $18 an hour job and has to just fight to have a roof over your children's head or to have food that they can eat, then there are even compensations there. There are ways to raise children that are healthier, and daycare isn't one of them, right? So if you are a housekeeper or a nanny, or you work in you work in a factory, or you work in a job that is a minimum wage job, there are even ways. You even have a choice, believe it or not, about how your child is going to be cared for. You can share the care of your children with another family. You can grab your friend Jane and say, Jane, let's hire our neighbor upstairs, Amy, who can take care of our children, and we can share the cost of her. And it would be the same as daycare, but so much better for our children. Or you could say, how about if we move in together and share an apartment, and that way we're not having to pay for two different apartments. We can share the cost of food. We can, so there are ways of creating extended families. So even with a poor woman who is struggling, but now you're not talking about that. You're talking about middle class, upper middle class, affluent families. Okay. So what we don't talk about, because it's taboo to talk about it, is how much we value materialism over relationships, how much we need our car and our house and our vacations and our clothes and our pocketbooks and over the value of raising healthy children. Because if you knew you could have all of those things in life, but you had to wait for them, you had to wait until your children were a little bit older and you had given them everything they needed. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't work a little bit when you raise children. As I said, women have always worked. When I go, wherever I travel around the world to speak about these issues, I go to India, I go to Africa, I go to Europe. I spend a lot of time in Europe. You see women working, but it's the kind of work where they don't leave their children. Their children go with them to work. They own bakeries, or they have little stores, or they work from home, or they have cooperatives with other mothers and they run businesses. It depends on which part of the world. They're farmers. They go out to the fields. They take their children. So we can work. I'm thinking of the old paradigm of the Avon ladies, because my husband's a social entrepreneur, and he basically took that idea to the rest of the world and found a way for women to sell eyeglasses in their villages, reading glasses, because he found that was a huge health gap, a huge gap. But the point that I'm making is that there's always ways. So he created Avon women, so to speak, who went from village to village and sold eyeglasses. They did it on their own time. They did it part-time. They made some money. So, it's not such a black and white thing.
Yeah,
it really is about, it's about being thoughtful and creative, but it's also about waiting. It really is about waiting and feeling that if you wait, you haven't sort of missed a train or a boat that you were supposed to get on, that everybody has gotten on, and that you're never going to catch that boat. The truth is, the women who jumped on the train and jumped on the boat and have left their children to work so intensely, I think the expression goes, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And a lot of those women are not so happy.
Oh, no. And nothing is more upsetting as a parent to see your child in distress with a mental health issue, whether it's severe ADHD, anxiety, depression. I mean, nothing is worse as a parent. That's it's or to, for them to be physically sick is just the worst, you know? I mean, that's so difficult. There's so many questions I want to ask you. Okay, so we kind of know that women can make choices, and I love that you said that. You just had a light bulb going off for me. It's like when you say these things, I'm really thinking to myself, why do I need a $1.3 million house? I actually really don't. I'm really happy. My son's really happy in our two-bedroom apartment. There's no pressure. We can pay the rent. There's no, and you're so right. It's like I could just wait 5 years and have the house. So why am I? Because once you get in the house and you have this huge mortgage, and then you want to buy a luxury car, all of a sudden you have all these pressures. Like you can't scale back from work, or you can't just walk away for 2 days from work and go do things with your kids. So that's so great. We really have gotten away from being patient as a society.
Yeah.
Talk to us about, you say men and women are not the same when it comes to parenting. Really, children, and my mother always told me this, and she was such a great mother and is such a great mother, but she's like, kids always want their moms. She always was, she said, it doesn't matter. They always want their mothers. Yes, the dads are great. You need a dad, but it's so different. And then, of course, I see and read all your stuff, and I'm like, because, I was like, oh, mom, that's crazy. My husband can stay home. And nope. And my mother stayed home with us. And it's funny, she worked. She always took care of older people that came to the house or we went to their house. And that's how she made money. She sat with them and then we could always go and do, play, watch TV. So talk to us about the differences of a father and a mother.
Well, fathers are playful and children need play. But that's not primarily what they need when they're growing up. They need that as a secondary thing. What they really need is they need sensitive, empathic nurturing. So, and that doesn't mean that fathers can't be sensitive and empathic, but for the most part, in an evolutionary way, males and females, in terms of mammals, have different functions in terms of their nurturing behaviors and their nurturing hormones. And so, we know that mothers produce something called oxytocin, which is a love hormone, and it makes mothers more sensitive, empathic nurturers. So it makes them more attuned to baby's distress and more sensitive to it. So, and fathers, when they produce oxytocin, because they're nurturing, it makes them more playful tactile stimulators, meaning more into encouraging babies to explore, to take risks, to play physically. It's a very different skill set, and it's a very different need that it fills in children. When you leave babies, particularly young babies with fathers, they get an overdose of fathering, but they miss the mothering. And the mothering in the first 3 years is critical to the foundation of things like emotional regulation and stress buffering. In fact, fathers expose children to more stress because that's what fathers do. They'll push children to experience more stress because in the separation process, you do need to do that. So when children get a little older, when they're 2 years old, and you're encouraging them to play on the monkey bars, or you're encouraging them to go down the slide, or you're encouraging them to run around and kick the ball, you do want to encourage them to engage with a little bit more stress. But when they're infants, you don't actually. You're actually trying to buffer them from stress. So fathers don't know from buffering children from stress. They're into exposing children to stress. And it's a way to help with separation, and it's a way to help with resilience building. So I would say that fathers and mothers are both important, but in the early years, mothers serve a more important role for children than fathers. And that's a controversial thing to say. And it doesn't mean that fathers aren't important. I mean, little boys, particularly little boys who are raised without fathers, have been known to not be able to regulate aggression because fathers regulate the emotion of aggression and excitement. So fathers are also important, but they aren't necessarily good replacements for mothers.
Yeah. How can women that are listening to this, how can you begin to repair maybe a child where you made these mistakes? I'll use myself for as an example, right? I sent my son to daycare at 18 months. You also are a big proponent, wear your baby. My son was 9 pounds. I had a C-section. It was like hard to hold him. I think 2 weeks later, he was like 12 pounds. I mean, he's like a massive child. So it was always really hard to hold him. I mean, I would sit and hold him a lot. Uh, you know, how do you, if you've made some mistakes like I have because we didn't know this information,
Yeah.
how can you repair those babies? Like my son is almost 4. Women listening to this, if we put our kid in daycare 5 months old, what can we do if we've already sort of made these mistakes?
Well, I mean, as much physical contact as you can have with your son now, meaning
Hmm.
sitting on the couch and snuggling, or putting him to bed and snuggling with him. We call it skin to skin contact with infants because we're breastfeeding, and it literally is skin to skin. And it's funny because I said to someone the other day, have skin to skin contact with your teenager. And my husband laughed and he said, well, you can't breastfeed your teenager. And I said, no, of course not. But skin to skin doesn't just mean actual skin to skin, it means physical affection and contact. And so the more physical contact you have, the more affection you show your child, the more likely you can repair. The other thing is that the more present you are. So with a 4-year-old, that window is still very much open. I mean, until your child, so there's 2 critical windows, 0 to 3 and adolescents are 9 to 25. But the truth is from 3 to 9, the window is still open. It's just that the majority of the right brain development happens from 0 to 3. So by 3 years of age, 85% of your right brain is developed. That means for another 6 years, you have another 15% of the brain, the right brain, that's developing before adolescence when it starts to prune, right? So, you still have 6 to 8 years, even because we say that puberty comes earlier than it probably should now. But let's say you have the 6 to 8 years of really being able to repair what you didn't give from 0 to 3. And so what that means is be there as much as possible physically to give them affection. Be there to help them to process their emotions, like you would have when they were little, when they fell off the slide and you were there and you said, oh, honey, how are you doing? Tell me how you're feeling. I can see if the boo-boo hurts. And you don't say it exactly the same way to a 7-year-old, but you say, I see you're hurt. Mommy, do you want mommy to give you a hug? And so you're really you're processing their emotions in the way that you would have processed them earlier. And you're reflecting their emotions. So if they're sad, you let them be sad. Whereas a father would encourage them not to be sad. A sensitive, healthy mother would empathically reflect and say, I see you're sad. It's okay to be sad. I see you're angry. It's okay to be angry. And so that's how you're repairing. You're reflecting, you're showing them tremendous amounts of affection, and you're as physically and emotionally present as possible. So again, that myth that quality time is enough, particularly if you're trying to repair something. The answer is quality time is not enough, and it never was enough. It was a justification for sending women off into the workforce as quickly as possible and abandoning their children.
I also have heard you say things like, set a time if you do work, like set a time, after 4 o'clock, you're not working, you're just engaging with your child. Like if you do have to work, I thought that was great advice,
Yeah.
and I really do that with my son. I pick him up at 4:30, and then after that, it's like we make dinner together, which I mean is you don't think it's very stimulating, but I think for him it's a big deal. He's 4,
Yeah.
puts the ingredients on the pizza. So, I really just like spend 2 hours of, okay, let's play trains. We play trains for a while, or we go for a walk or the market, and then maybe we watch TV for 20 or 30 minutes, but I mean, I thought that was great. If women do have to work, you kind of say, set that time, right?
Yes. So reduce the amount of time that your child is in any kind of childcare or school. Opt for a shorter day for them if they're in preschool. Don't opt for the long day, opt for the short day. Work very part-time, work as part-time as you possibly can. And then be there during the transition periods. When they wake up, excuse me, when they go to sleep, picking them up from school, being with them until bedtime. Those are transition times.
What is it specifically that you don't like about daycare? What is it? Is it that just, people are never going to care for your child the way you will?
So,
Most daycares are disconnected. What is it?
so children require your presence because it makes them feel safe. When you put them in daycare, you're basically raising their stress levels because you're removing them from the source of security. You're removing them from their center of gravity, from the person in the world who makes them feel safe. So you're expecting, remember what I said causes unhappiness, when expectations exceed capability. Your expectations that your child can be separated from you for hours at a time under the age of 3 and be just fine is false. And so what it does is it makes them feel insecure, unsafe, anxious, fearful, and it raises their salivary cortisol levels. So we have research to show that their stress hormone levels go up, which are meant to be very quiet and diminutive, and you're meant to keep very quiet and keep them down in those first 3 years. So the stress regulating part of the brain is not meant to be turned on so intensely until after 3. So incrementally, yes, but not so intensely. So you separate them from the source of their security. They get into a stress state, and it leads to higher levels of aggression later on, higher levels of distractibility, or what we call ADHD-like behaviors. Remember, fight or flight. So when we're stressed as human beings, we go into fight or flight, which means that we either fight the predator or we run from it. And the distractibility we're seeing in children is because we're sending them into these highly stressed, fearful states where we've sort of removed them from our presence, which provided them with a sense of safety and security. Essentially, they don't feel safe. And they can put on a good face, but inside they don't feel safe. So you are the center of their universe. You are their universe under 3. You are the center of their security and their safety. And even when they're exploring, they still look back to see if you're there and come and hug you because they need to know that they're safe. And they don't internalize that feeling of safety until at least 3 years of age.
And so that's a leading cause now of kids' ADHD, right? Is that detachment. And so it's just
fear.
so hard.
It's fear.
Wow.
Fear. It's stress and it's fear. It's not feeling safe. It's feeling pursued by a predator.
Wow. Is there a way you can reverse ADHD if your child is 7, 8? Again, working mother, right? All the women that I know have been told this, oh, go to work, put them in daycare.
I know.
It's horrible.
I know.
So can you reverse ADHD? What do you do if you have a child?
You repair, and you repair by So what I say is if you have a child who has ADHD, you quit your job. If you can, you take a year off and you wake up in the morning and you're there when they wake up and you take them to school and you're there when they get home from school and you provide them with that safety and security that they didn't have for all those years that you were not there. You repair. If you have a pair of socks, wool hiking socks that you love, nobody darns socks anymore, but if you have a pair of wool hiking socks that you love, you darn them quickly so the hole doesn't get bigger. And the quicker you get to the hole, the more of a chance that the darning will make the sock stronger. But if you leave that hole, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it can no longer be repaired. So the sooner you can get to that behavior, which is fearful behavior, and you provide them, you become their rock. You become their emotional and physical rock. Not hovering, not helicoptering, but you're there. So when they need you, you're there. You provide them with the safety and security so they can explore, but that they know you're there. And I think we've really lied to parents and told them that children are like self-cleaning ovens from the time they're born. But they're not. They're manual.
Erica, who has given you the biggest backlash in your career? Has it been women, men, online groups?
You'd be surprised how in the beginning, when my book came out, there was quite a backlash. But if you look at your comments, there's a number of people who will be very upset and angry and get defensive and feel guilty. But a lot of women say, oh my God, this makes so much sense to me. Just nobody has said it to me or given me permission to feel the way I feel. I would say that's the majority of the response. And in the last 2 years, so you said you saw me on the internet. I wrote this book and came out in 2017. And in 2017, it sold, 10,000 copies. But what happened in the last couple of years is, maybe I was a little ahead of my time. And that can happen with books, is that, you ride a wave and it either is at the right time. But in the last couple of years, the ground has been more fertile. Now, whether that's because children's mental health has deteriorated even more and women are unhappier and, but the ground became fertile and suddenly I'm all over the internet and these podcast interviews. And I think that what I would say is the response is far more positive than it is negative now.
Yes. What's the message that you wish society would give women today? If you were running the movement, what's the message?
That you can do everything in life. You just can't do it all at the same time. And you have to learn to wait. And you have to learn to cope with your frustration. And you have to learn to cope with your boredom. And if you can't, then get help before you have children or while you're raising children to understand how your own childhood is impacting, how your mother raised you is impacting how you're raising your children. If your own mother couldn't bear waiting, if she couldn't bear frustration, if she couldn't bear boredom, if she couldn't play with you, if she resented having children and resented dependency, how that impacted your feelings about raising your own children, how it's impairing your ability to see empathically your children's fragility, right? Because if we can't see empathically our children's fragility, then our children are all but lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a message for women too about, thankfully I had an OBGYN that always told me from the time I was probably 25, like your clock is ticking. Like if you want to have a child, and of course, in my mind, I was like, oh, it'll be fine. I've had 3 miscarriages, thankfully 1, healthy son. But of course, once I wanted kids at 35, it becomes more of a challenge. Is there something you would say to women, like that message too? You can wait is big out there.
Another lie. Listen, I think the truth is that there are many women who could wait until their 30s and have children and be just fine. But there seems to be a trend. Say it goes along with the trend of why are girls getting their periods so much earlier. It seems to me that our fertility has been pushed forward. I always get this confused, not pushed back, pushed forward, because in pushing it back in age, we're pushing forward our fertility, right? And so what that means is that we're fertile younger and we become maybe less fertile older. And that seems to be a trend that's happening. So does that mean that women can't have careers when they're in their early 20s and mid 20s? I see no issue with that. I think it's I always say your 20s is a great time to build skills, get an education, build your skills, but then don't need to be the CEO until you're in menopause. Wait for that big career until wait to do your podcast until there are so many stories in my book, and I'm a good story. So I was a therapist who was seeing 40 hours of patients a week in my early 20s. I remember I would come home at 10 o'clock at night. My husband would say, oh my God, you see so many patients. And then I had children, and it was a strategy we had that I would take a lot of time off, and then I would only go back 1 or 2 sessions a day, which meant that for the entirety of my children's childhood, I never worked more than 10 hours a week. And that 10 hours enabled me in my private practice, because the type of career we choose also matters, that we have control and flexibility, but that enabled me to get the support that I needed because my husband was working super hard. So I was able to have a mother's helper, And together we were able to, the mother's helper and I were able to raise 3 children. And I was able to go out an hour and a half to 2 hours every morning after 6 months and just make enough money to pay the mother's helper and race back. And then we were together. We'd go to the playground together. We would sometimes split up. But the idea was that for a decade or more, probably 15 years of raising children, I didn't have much of a career. I mean, it was an hour or 2 of patients a day, and that was it. I didn't go to conferences. I wasn't famous. The only people who knew my name were my children and my husband and my very few handful of patients. And so I didn't have a big career. But as soon as I got in my 50s, I said, right, I want to write this book now. And now I have a big career. I travel all over the world. I'm world renowned in my field. You can do a lot in life. You just can't do it all at the same time if you want to raise healthy children. And that's a choice you have to make.
I love it. You've inspired me. I'm putting this podcast on hold. I mean, I'll do a few. I want to have another baby. I'm putting this on hold big time until I'm 50, because once you have that child, it's just like you said, if you are a healthy, adapted person, that light goes off.
3 decades when you're the most productive. I was going to say the most fertile with your career. Your 50s, your 60s, your 70s as a woman. So when your husband's in decline, so maybe do a podcast on that. When your husband's in decline, menopause makes women take off. So now women have to learn to say to their husband, hell no, I won't go to Florida or Arizona or any retirement community. I'm just getting started.
Oh my God.
And I'll leave you on that note.
Erica, fabulous. Come back. We adore you. Thank you so much. We'll be promoting your books, and thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Bye, Erica.
Bye.